Good evening from the News Radio, 1120 and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I'm Bill London, co-host of the Wake Up Call, heard on this fine radio station, 6 a.m. to 9, Monday through Friday, also streaming online at kpnw.com. And news brought to you by none other than the man, Dr. Michael Bratland. And I have an appointment coming up soon. I'm going to have the cap recapped. I'll let you know how it goes because I know you're concerned about my dental health. So, first off, I just wanted to throw this out there. Did you watch the vice presidential debate? And secondly, what did you think about it? I think for myself, personally, if there was anything I took away from it, was a new way to deal with my wife. Now, I'll admit, I'm a guy, and occasionally I forget to do the things that I'm supposed to do. Like, for instance, empty the garbage. So the next time my wife comes to me on garbage day, after the garbage trucks have run, and asks me, why didn't you take the garbage out this morning before you left for work? Here's how I'm going to answer. Honey, I grew up in a small community. It was a farming community with traditional values. There were only about 5 or 6 families that were on our dead-end road growing up there in the bucolic surroundings. And, during that time, I learned a lot about garbage. I watched the garbage man every Wednesday show up and take our garbage man to his truck and pick it up and dump the garbage in there. And I remember thinking what a hardworking man Alan, the garbage man, was. And so, yeah, I watched that many Wednesdays. I learned a lot about garbage. I don't know what your takeaway was. All right, in actual Oregon news, I don't even know where to start. We'll start off with overdose deaths. Yep, we're number fail. Overdose deaths across the U.S. are falling, except in one little outlier. Yeah, that would be Oregon. A rise in overdoses, of course, led lawmakers to sorta, kinda, barely reverse Oregon's first in the nation legalize all street drugs movement, and they recriminalized, sorta, kinda, drugs in the spring. Now, research published last month found that the introduction of fentanyl into Oregon's illicit drug supply, I like how they just look at it as an illicit drug supply. Anyway, it accounted for the growing number of overdose deaths, and I don't think that's surprising to anyone. But between May of 2023 and April of 2024, Oregon saw over 1,900 overdose deaths. That is a 22% increase over the previous 12 months. Which at the time was over a 50% increase over the previous year. That according to new data from the CDC. Nationwide, though, overdose deaths, fell by 10% during the same period. And, of course, once again, everyone says, well, this had nothing to do with decriminalizing street drugs in Oregon. Nah, nothing to see here. Nothing. By the way, the recriminalization, and I say that with air quotes that look like this, the recriminalization only took effect in September, but most counties that bought into the program haven't even got their deflection system set up yet. So until they do, cities, counties, and the like can't even charge people. The Washington State Transportation Commission met with the Oregon Department of Transportation discussing tolls on the new interstate bridge project connecting Oregon and Washington. And they're talking about, okay, so how much should we toll people to pay for this new bridge? The numbers that were floated were between $1.55 and $3.65 one way. So somebody that lives in Vancouver but works in Portland can figure they potentially could be paying well over $7.25 a day just for, well, the privilege of working and commuting. Each one of the commissions are going to have to take a majority vote to pass the proposed tolls. Construction on the bridge expected to begin sometime in early 2026. So as you probably well know, we have elections coming up. I kind of referred to it in the introduction here. And it's about 5 weeks from the actual election. And the Portland Police Bureau is planning for protests and in particular violence. Now, obviously, nobody can predict how November 5th is actually going to shake out. But let's look at history. In 2016, Donald Trump's presidential victory had protesters engaging in nightly demonstrations for well over a week, and many of those gatherings turned into riots. Then 4 years later, in 2020, it was relative peace on election night when President Biden won. But on his inauguration night, far-left protesters hit the Democratic Party headquarters, smashing windows and tagging walls, and also, busting out windows to some nearby buildings because, hey, the broken windows on the Democratic Party building need a little bit of company. And the people that were doing that were carrying signs that read, "We don't want Biden, we want revenge." That's a peaceful protester. Then, of course, who can forget the nightly violence for close to a year in Portland as self-described peaceful protesters broke out windows, attacked businesses, tried to set fire to buildings, fought with police, and in some cases attacked innocent civilians in the name of social justice after the death of George Floyd. And all through the pandemic, it was a fairly regular stream of vandalism and rioting that ended up costing the city and private businesses tens of millions of dollars in damage. Well, PPB has mandated now to prepare every sworn officer in the Portland Police Bureau will be on duty on November 5th and in the days following. That will include canceling days off, and staff will be on mandatory 12-hour shifts as they contend with lingering staffing issues because, remember, a whole bunch of people quit the Portland Police Department during those riots in 2020. Right now, they have 800 sworn members compared to over 1,000 in 2019. According to PPB, he said they say that people can show up in typical Portland ways with a robust commitment to First Amendment expression. At the same time, don't engage in criminal activity. The question remains, what will they actually do? Well, we've been following this story, and that has to do with Oregon's motor voter law. And what that means is that any time that you register for a license here in Oregon, for a driver's license, an Oregon ID card, and the like, well, you're automatically registered to vote. Now, Oregon is one of those states that a couple of years ago decided that anybody from anywhere that wants to get a license can get one in Oregon, whether they're here, by the way, legally or not. And when the motor voter law passed and when also the bill passed, it said everybody that's here in Oregon should have a driver's license. The question was asked, well, what are we doing to ensure that people that are not U.S. citizens aren't being registered to vote? And those people were told, don't worry about this. We got it covered. And then, as we've been reporting, that it was discovered after an outside think tank that's not even in the state started questioning Oregon DMV about just exactly what the guardrails on the motor voter registrations, when we discovered that so far, at least 1,259 people who are not U.S. citizens were actually registered to vote and sent ballots. And there's been, well, shall we say, fallout from that. Here's the latest. Now, Oregon transportation authorities, and that would be the Oregon Department of Transportation, which runs the Oregon DMV, actually waited 6 weeks to tell election officials about the error that registered over 1,200 non-citizens to be able to vote. Now, Oregon DMV actually learned about the improper registrations on August 1st. Now, that is according to an admission by ODOT. But Oregon Secretary of State, LaVon Griffin-Vlad, who is in charge of elections here in the state of Oregon, has said she only found out about the error on September 12th, 6 weeks later. So DMV knew on August 1st, and they waited until September 12th before they said, there might be a problem here. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek didn't find out about it until September 13th. That according to one of her spokespeople. So ODOT was asked the obvious question: why did you keep it under wraps for 6 weeks? And ODOT's response: we're not answering any more questions. Oregon election officials say they have now struck 1,259 people from the voters' rolls after determining that they're not U.S. citizens and they won't receive a 2024 ballot for this particular election. But that leaves the question of, okay, if the state of Oregon is that sloppy when it comes to voter registration and who's on the voter rolls, now keep in mind this started happening back in 2019. If they're that sloppy, how many other people are on the Oregon voter rolls? Say people that don't even live here, or maybe people who don't live on Earth anymore because, well, they're dead. How many of those people are still receiving ballots? Now, at this point, the Secretary of State has so far refused to go back through and check the voter rolls in the state of Oregon, but continues to say, we have voter integrity here in the state of Oregon. Yeah, until somebody from outside of the state pins your ears back to the wall about it and outs you. Okay, another story we've followed, and that has to do with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And if you recall, they had said in September that they were going to start taking bids on October 15th for about 200,000 acres of ocean area in some of the most fertile fishing grounds along the Pacific coast to build gigantic multi-story high windmills that are going to be supposedly anchored to the ocean floor in water that's anywhere from 500 to 1,500 feet deep, with these windmills that have never been done anywhere else and are totally unproven technology. Well, they received a lot of pushback and were getting a beating over the proposed massive windmill operation. Now, BLM, like I said, was supposed to take bids on 200,000 acres of ocean off the Oregon coast. Now, after going through all of this rigmarole of, we listened and had public comment, well, BLM didn't listen to anybody and went ahead. So, first thing that happened was the Native Oregon tribes filed suit against BLM for a number of reasons. Then, most of the bidders, actually all of them except one, pulled out of the process because of the heat they were receiving as coastal communities in the entire Oregon Coastal Caucus, made up of both Democrats and Republicans, blew their freaking lids. Then you had pretty much every city on the coast absolutely losing their minds over it, and all of them were targeting Governor Tina Kotek, who, when BLM said, yeah, we're going to auction stuff off, responded with, oh, okay, good luck. It's important that we do this for clean energy. Well, guess what happened late last week? There was a nastygram from BLM, from Governor Tina Kotek, who, in a complete 180, started slamming BLM, saying Oregon's legislative caucus is now, like Coastal Caucus, is now in full opposition to BLM's proposed lease. Governor, where have you been? They've been in opposition to it for the last year and a half. She further said, my office has heard broader concerns this month from renewable energy, labor, fishing, and conservation communities about the risks that the failed competitive lease process would pose to Oregon's developing supply chain industry and to its environmentally sensitive offshore habitats. Again, Governor Kotek, this has been said over and over again for well over a year and a half. Where have you been? And then she withdrew the BLM, withdrew the state from the BLM, Oregon Intergovernmental Renewable Energy Task Force, to ensure that, in her words, Oregon's interests are fully protected. And a day later, BLM just said, the auction's off. Now, the Confederated Tribes, the first ones to stand up and say, okay, we'll see you in court, are commending the decision to at least postpone the auction of offshore floating wind leases on the Oregon coast. So, what does this mean? Well, it means that apparently everyone is going back to the drawing board. The governor says there needs to be more listening sessions and more things need to be worked out. Now, typically that is Governor Tina Kotek's way of trying to diffuse a controversial situation where she doesn't really stop it. She just puts it off, and then the state works on a new form of messaging where they can try to spin things so that people will go along with it. On this particular case, my thought is good luck. And then you have crime and injustice in Oregon, and we'll end with that. Now, we've talked, I don't know, how long have I been doing this, Rick? A couple of years here. We have talked about really a problem with Oregon's justice system where people are arrested for major crimes and they're let out of prison early, or in the case with our former governor, Kate Brown, where she used the COVID era to just say, oh, you know, these prisoners are in risk of getting COVID. Let's let a few thousand of them out. Well, not a few thousand, over 1,000. Let's just turn them loose. Let's just let them go. All right, well, here's one of Oregon's latest epic failures. And this comes from Springfield, Oregon, which is right next door to Eugene, Oregon, actually right across I-5 from it. A man accused of stabbing a man in Springfield during our January ice storm was found guilty by a Lane County jury. Now, in January of 2024, during this huge freezing rain and ice storm that caused significant damage to local infrastructure, people's homes, a man was out helping his neighbors, trying to clean up storm debris on L Street in Springfield. That's when 44-year-old Thomas Murphy attacked him, stabbed him 9 times before anybody could intervene. The victim suffered a collapsed lung, among other injuries. Fortunately, he survived. And a jury found Murphy guilty of first-degree assault after a 2-day trial. And this week, he was sentenced to 7 years and 6 months in prison, with 3 years of probation after his release. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. But let's go back to 2014. Now, Murphy has been through the Lane County court system before. In 2014, he attacked 2 women with a pickaxe and hammer on L Street, just a few blocks from where he committed his latest crime. And during that time, The following year, in 2015, Murphy was found guilty by insanity for attacking these two women. Now, Murphy was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, and he was sent to the state mental hospital, placed under the jurisdiction of the state Psychiatric Security Review Board. Now, the judge in the case said that Murphy was to remain in custody for a minimum of 30 years. That's what the judge said in 2015. Then in March of 2017, officials from the Psychiatric Review Board determined, well, Murphy doesn't have a mental disease. It was more likely just a temporary attack due to amphetamine-induced psychotic disorder. And they ordered him not only to be released from custody in 2017, but all of the prior charges were dropped and were to be expunged from his record. He was supposed to be in custody for 30 years, released after 2 years by a group of bureaucrats that said, oh, it was just amphetamine. He's okay. Let him go. He's not dangerous. Tell that to the helpful neighbor on L Street that was stabbed 9 times. Welcome to crime and injustice in Oregon. All right, there's your stories, Rick. You can now roll out a can of Real, and thanks to Dr. Michael Bratland of Chris Dental, if you call him today, he'll see you today. Ta.